Capes on the Couch podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Dr. Issues is a psychiatrist, but he is not your psychiatrist and does not have knowledge of your individual situation. For any personal mental health concerns, please consult your own healthcare providers. For medical emergencies, please call 911 or the designated number in your area immediately. Remember that you are not alone and help is out there.
Hello and welcome to Capes on the Couch, where Come Get Counseling. I'm Anthony Sitko.
And I'm Dr. Issues.
This is issue number 125. By the way, welcome back. It's good to be back. We were on a bit of a hiatus there for a little bit of a summer break. Hope you had a fun time, Doc.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not going to lie, I was still working, but, did take some time with the family a little bit.
I enjoyed my time off, except for the part where my kid broke his leg. But he's fine now. He's a 2-year-old little speed demon, and he was running around and he just slipped and torqued his leg in a wrong way and broke his femur, but he's out of the cast, thankfully. Okay. And we got all that taken care of.
Yeah. The good news is at that age, they definitely bounce back.
Yes, they do. But enough about that. We have a very special guest with us here today for our episode all about Black Widow, which is going to be coming out this week in theaters. We have with us a very eminent name in the field, the superhero therapist herself, Dr. Janina Scarlet. Dr. Scarlet, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited. I've been following you guys for a while on Twitter, so I'm really honored to be on. Thank you.
And right back at you. We've been following you for some time and just loving the work that you're doing in the field and the whole notion of superhero therapy. So before we get into Natasha, who's obviously got a lot on her plate, individually, tell us a little bit about yourself, and I know you wrote several books, and just sort of explain a little bit of your background. So for our listeners who may not be familiar with you.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you so much. I was born and raised in Ukraine. And as a small child, my family and I were exposed to Chernobyl radiation. And so what that meant for me was, unlike Spider-Man or Hulk or a lot of other superheroes, I didn't develop spidey senses. Not yet. Anyway, I'm working on it. But what that meant for me was spending most of my childhood in and out of the hospital and developing conditions that I still have to this day, such as whenever the weather changes, I get very, very ill. And when I moved to the United States, I was severely bullied. I was that weird kid in middle school that didn't speak English. Middle school's already really vicious. And I'll be honest, in middle school, no one talked about mental health. So I thought it was just me. I thought I was the only one that struggled with anxiety and depression. And then a few years later, I saw the X-Men and it changed everything. I saw Storm, who changed my life forever with her connection to the weather. And she's still my favorite superhero to this day. And I realized that we can talk about trauma. We can talk about mental health through stories. And that's what I specialize in now. I work with individuals with post-traumatic stress disorder and anxiety disorders. And I specialize in helping them to develop their own healing journey to become their own version of a superhero through their connection with fictional characters.
That is awesome. I have your recent book, which is a fantastic read. About halfway through it. It's on my nightstand. So every night before bed, I try to read at least about a couple of pages, if not a full chapter. And even though full disclosure, it's a book geared towards women, I do find that there are still a lot of really valuable lessons that I can take away from it. And my wife is very intrigued by it. And she says, when you're done with it, I'm going to read it. When she saw me buy it, she actually thought I bought it for her. And I was like, no, I'm reading it for me, but you can read it when I'm done with it. So that was just like I said, I love the idea of superhero therapy. And as you said, talking about teaching people to discover their origin stories. I think using that imagery is incredibly powerful. And obviously that's something that Doc and I, talk about regularly on the show.
Yeah. I mean, I still work full time as a psychiatrist at a hospital. And so I actually mentioned that we were going to be doing this particular podcast episode, and I definitely touted your work. And it was fascinating. Social workers, mental health associates, nurses, everyone. When I mentioned this, it was interesting how they lit up. I'm talking people that have done this type of work for decades, like long careers. And it was as if they were rejuvenated just by this idea. So that's just how powerful sometimes these thoughts can be. So thank you so much for joining us on this podcast, and thank you for everything that you've done and will continue to do.
Thank you. Thank you for your kind words, and thank you for having me.
So let's dive in then. Black Widow, Natalia Alianovna, Natasha Romanova, created by Stanley, Don Rico, and Don Heck in Tales of Suspense number 52, April 1964. Young Natalia was raised and trained by the Red Room, which is a secret Soviet facility training assassins. She was sent to America to assassinate Anton Vanko, who had defected from Russia, but she was defeated by Iron Man. Then she enlisted Hawkeye's help in fighting him, but they were defeated as well. And then when Clint saved her, she began falling for him, and he helped her to defect. She later joined the Avengers, and longtime listeners of our show know that we don't dive too much into a lot of the particulars. We try and hit a lot of the big points of a character's backstory, because this is, it's less about, we're going to talk about this story arc, etc. But a lot of Natasha's stories involve either working for an agency or working for herself and trying to balance the karmic scales, so to speak, of the things that she had done while under the influence of the Red Room. So she began working for S.H.I.E.L.D., and then she started a relationship with Daredevil while he was stationed in San Francisco. And that book was actually called Daredevil and the Black Widow for a time. She then encounters Yelena Belova, another graduate of the Red Room, who wants to take Natasha out so she can inherit the Black Widow mantle. And Natasha uses psychological manipulation to force Yelena to confront her own past. For a while, she has a relationship with Bucky Barnes while he's working as the Winter Soldier. Natasha serves on the Secret Avengers under Captain America. Natasha is killed during the Incursion event, which merged the mainstream and Ultimate Marvel universes during Secret Wars. But she was resurrected after Molecule Man restored the damage that had been done. We talk about that on our Molecule Man episode. Except she's killed again, this time by Hydra-influenced Steve Rogers, for better or worse. And after her death, the Red Room cloned her, including her memories, #BecauseComics, and tasked the clone with taking out Hydra and S.H.I.E.L.D. The clone, calling herself Natasha Romanoff, instead eliminated the Red Room leadership and freed all of the recruits. As I said, the Black Widow has been a character for close to 60 years at this point. That is a microcosm, a smattering of the stories that she's been involved in. But again, for the sake of time, and because, I really want to delve into the discussions that we're going to have with Dr. Scarlet, we'll have some recommended reading at the end of the episode. So the first issue that I want to get into, and I'm really curious to see where Doc Issues and Dr. Scarlet are going to go with this, the manipulation by the Red Room and its repeated attempts to bring her back under their control. She's never really freed from her past, even though the Red Room, even though the Soviet Union fell and the Red Room is in theory gone, the people that ran it still want to use her as an agent for their own nefarious purposes, whatever they may be. And so it's this idea, and we've spoken about this with other characters, that no matter what your past is, you can never truly escape it. And for someone like Natasha, who again did some pretty, objectively terrible things in her past as a result of the influence from the Red Room, she is constantly forced to relive that over and over and over again, and she can never get free from that. So, Doc Issues, Dr. Scarlet, take it away.
I'll jump in on this one only because when you wrote this out, I thought immediately, I don't know what this says about me, but I like a lot of criminal stories. So things involving gangs, mafia, things like that. But ultimately, what a lot of those stories come back to is the idea of family at all costs. And so there's another side to that, dysfunctional family at all costs. So the famous line, once they thought I was out, they pull me back in. I'm butchering that line, I know. But just the idea that you end up developing relationships with people, and sometimes it's not always your choice as to whether or not you're going to have interactions. And example would be, let's say it's a family funeral. Let's say it's just a circumstance like they're going over the will. Now you have people that haven't sat in a room with each other for decades even, and yet they're blood related and they now have to work things out. Just as a random example. But just the idea that at some point that just because things were one way long time ago doesn't mean they have to stay that way. And let's say you have gone through therapy or you have had these types of conversations. That doesn't mean anybody else has. And they may still have the exact same mindset as they did years ago. And if that's the case, then now you're navigating a very strange circumstance. You're still trying to be healthy for yourself. And maybe I'll put a positive spin on it. Maybe the people involved want to improve the relationship, but they don't know how. And so from that standpoint, you're creating a lot of opportunities for reintroduced trauma, reintroduced emotional tensions, there's no right or wrong way how to handle those, but it's a minefield. It's just something that you don't know how to plan for, and nobody does. But the best you could do, though, is make sure that you have the right people in your corner to work through it. I mean, that's just kind of a brief introduction, and specific to Natasha with the Red Room. I'm also thinking of an agency like the Hand. Like when at one point they were manipulating Wolverine. Obviously, when multiple people want to get agendas done, they're not going to look at just what you want. That's the best way I can put it. Everybody is going to look at what benefits them first. And if that's the case, then it can be really difficult, especially if you have torn alliances.
Yeah, I love what you just said, and building on to what you just said, Doc. I think, just thinking about Natasha's backstory, it made me think to so many of my clients that I've worked with who had really traumatic childhoods, who grew up in very abusive environments where their family members either physically, emotionally, or sexually abused them or forced them to do really awful things. And it's really interesting because, as you said, it's trauma is not something we really get away from. It's something we can build some distance with, but we don't necessarily just erase it. And when somebody like Natasha is trying to establish a new life and a new identity, unfortunately, a lot of times that might be the very time that the family might bring them back. And just as people are trying to get healthier, that's usually when they'll get the biggest pushback from their families, that leading to a lot of conflicts and also demeaning and insults and arguments. For a lot of individuals who survive trauma, it might be really hard to navigate between, well, do I owe everything to my family and should I do everything my family tells me because, hey, these are my parents, for example, versus, but this is morally wrong, or this is something that goes against my core values. That's very much Natasha's balancing issue here, right? Because she's made to kill a lot of different people. And it's when she kills somebody who is innocent that she realizes that this goes against her core values. This is not the person she wants to be. Just like a lot of trauma survivors, it's a really hard line to find this kind of independence and also to be able to stand up to the abusive parental figures, which for Natasha is very difficult for a long time. Which is why she ends up wiping out the red cell, because there's no healthy way that she can be alive and the red cell can exist, because not only her but other girls will continue being victimized by it.
Yeah, and to the point about traumatic childhoods and things of that nature, I've read so many stories about folks who grew up with narcissistic parents, and as adults, they are trying to delineate very clear boundaries. And what they say is, they'll go limited contact with them because it's difficult for them, as you said, to completely cut that tie, because they do still feel maybe there's some good in them. Maybe there's, they are still my parents. I still want to love them and so on. And so it's in the process of establishing those boundaries and saying, these are the things that I will allow you to be involved in my life. And these are the areas where I won't. That's typically when I've read, again, countless stories of folks saying that was where I realized I had to actually go no contact and I had to cut them out completely, because there was no healthy delineation. There was no healthy balance, as you were saying, that it had to unfortunately be an all or nothing. And it wasn't on the part of the child. It wasn't on the part of the victim per se. It was because the narcissist or the abuser refused to allow the boundary to be set. And so for somebody like Natasha, again, those red room handlers, they will not allow her to set those boundaries, and they are going to keep bringing her back, and part of it, I think, is it's done for storytelling purposes, for dramatic license, et cetera, obviously. Oh, I'm free. I'm going to start a new life and I'm going to put it all behind me. And that's when, somebody shows up, that's when Yelena shows up. That's when, the Red Guardian shows up. That's when someone comes with a tale from her past. And I think that's actually very much the point of, and the plot of the new movie is Natasha being forced to go and confront a lot of the things that she had dealt with and the things that she thought she had put away. And unfortunately, her past comes back to haunt her.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think Dr. Scarlet, I'll agree with her on a lot of things, but especially this that she pointed out. And I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just pushing back a little bit in terms of it's not just for dramatic effect. That does happen very often. I've had that happen with a lot of patients.
It absolutely does. I'm just talking about within the comics universe that they're going to mine that notion
I hear you.
for the purpose of, for the storytelling. But yes, to your point and to Dr. Scarlet's, obviously that does happen in real life.
Right. I've had a patient call it. They said, it feels like there's an emotional vacuum. Like just when I feel like I've gotten everything neat and tidy, there's enough space just for someone to jump in and start to mess it up again.
Emotional vacuum. I like that. And I shouldn't like that because it's a horrible concept, but I like the idea of that. And I think that's very well put. So moving on to the second issue then, and this is something that, we had alluded to in the background and in the intro. She's constantly trying to redeem herself for her assassinations. And she feels that what she did was horrible. What she's continuing to do is horrible. So she spins it in her mind that the people that I'm doing these horrible things to are much more horrible than me, or they deserve it. And it's this justification, and I hesitate to use the term mental gymnastics because I think there's a negative connotation there, but there is this constant internal struggle of saying, I'm doing this because these people are really, really bad, but I have a certain set of skills, et cetera, cue Liam Neeson from Taken. But like I said, it's that constantly trying to redeem herself. And so Dr. Scarlet, we'll start off with you on this. What does that do to somebody when they're constantly having to justify why they're doing these terrible things because they're telling themselves, and maybe they're right, but they're telling themselves at least the people that I'm hurting are worse?
Yeah, I think that part of what happens to a lot of people when there's this discrepancy between their moral code and their actions is that it creates what we call a dissonance, right? And when there is cognitive dissonance, this discrepancy basically between what we do and what we believe in, individuals tend to find some kind of way to explain it. And so that there is no more dissonance. So for Natasha, the only way she could essentially survive was to tell herself, but these people are really bad. And so in a lot of ways, I'm doing justice here until she has to kill an innocent man. For a lot of individuals, including service members who a lot of times go to war and of course have to kill people, they might develop something called moral injury. So moral injury is when somebody does something that goes against their moral code. And as a result of that, they start shaming themselves and feeling awful about what happened, believing not just their action to be bad, but believing themselves to be a bad person, which can lead to the development of post-traumatic stress disorder. And I don't know that we have enough information to determine whether Natasha has PTSD. I'd really want to meet her in person if she was real and evaluate her. But it does seem like she really struggles with potential guilt and shame. And I think she's trying to make up for what she's done. And so although I can't say for sure whether she has PTSD, I do think that it's possible that Natasha struggles with moral injury.
Yeah, that's an excellent description. Just to give examples of that, there's also a part of what can happen to continue with service members, but it could be police officers, basically anyone that's put in a position where they have to make difficult decisions about potentially ending a person's life or injuring someone because they have to protect other people. There can be a sense of depersonalization, not just for themselves in terms of they have training and therefore they're doing exactly what they have physically and mentally been prepared to do, but also that the object of what they are doing, and I'm using that term specifically, saying that is an object, that is not a person, because the more you make that a person, the more likely that you're going to experience the possibilities of moral injury. If you're simply rationalizing to the point that is a job, you're creating something that is no longer biological, you're creating something that is simply a task in your own schema of how you're getting through the day and you're checking off a checklist, that can get you through that moment. But unfortunately, it doesn't change the memory. And especially if you have any reminders of that, the fact that you still are dealing with other human beings, the second that that gets brought back, then you can still process that information. Because sometimes I've had patients tell me like, oh, well, I didn't think that at the time, but then someone mentioned to me like, oh yeah, did you go to, did you take a vacation? I'm thinking specifically of a Vietnam veteran. He took a vacation, actually. It wasn't even, you would think it was in Asia or something. No, he took a vacation in the Caribbean and somebody happened to mention a certain beach and it had like a very similar venue and it just brought everything back. And just the idea that this is what I did in this environment. And then seeing they compared it like I saw other soldiers and therefore I could do my job. Now I'm seeing children and I'm seeing them walking and running. And now the idea like, wait, why would I even think that? Once again, it actually reemerged the dissonance that had been, kind of mitigated by this person's technique of just blocking it out. And like I said, not identifying what they were doing as dealing with people. So it's definitely something that people are aware of. And once again, not to make it sound like, because sometimes I think we get into this idea, if we're talking about this, then we mean all soldiers or all officers. And that's not the case. Not everybody experiences these things the same way. We're just pointing out that there is a risk with that. And sometimes people do end up at that point. With Natasha, especially for the sake of writing and things like that, to be honest, compared to a lot of other characters, I don't think they delve as much with it. But it's very clear that she is willing to express the times where she's having difficulty.
Well, I think a lot of what you're talking about was covered very well in the Edmondson Noto run, where she is very explicitly doing what she does. She says, I'm not trying to make a profit on this. I'm not trying to, get rich off of taking these jobs. I'm very much trying to fund a trust and put good out into the world. But again, it all comes back to, the line that she used from the movie. I've got red in my ledger. That's her mindset, her constant mindset of just remembering all the horrible things that she did and what can I do to balance it out. That's why, spoiler alert, she sacrifices herself in Endgame, is because she feels that that's the ultimate way that she can pay penance for the things that she has done. And so her whole life is spent in service of that greater ideal in the hopes that maybe at the end of it, she will have balanced things out. In that respect, there's a little bit of, similarity to somebody like a Frank Castle, where they feel that the devotion to the greater ideal and saying, okay, I'm doing this because it's something in service, a greater ideal than me. And because I'm eliminating all these terrible people, that's again, the mental gymnastics. So the last issue that I want to talk about, because again, Natasha is, just such a wonderful well of topics, but we try to stick to three, is the life of a spy and a secret agent. Her identity is always in flux, and she's always constantly using different names, different locations, her backstory. Again, the start of the Edmondson Noto run, she's trying to empathize with someone who is ostensibly going to commit suicide. And so she's relaying her backstory to somebody. And then it turns out that he's actually a bad guy and she's delivering him to the authorities. And he says, oh, I know your story now. I'll be able to find you. And she said, good luck with that, because everything I told you is a lie. It's this idea that she knows who she is inside, but she constantly has to live false identities. And again, we try not to bring it too much to the movies, but there's the wonderful line that she has in Captain America Winter Soldier, when she says to Steve, I'll be anything you need. Like, what do you need right now? And he's like, how about a friend? So that inability to own your identity and be able to express it freely is taxing mentally. And so I'll open this up to, either Doc Issues or Dr. Scarlet, whomever, wants to tackle that first.
I love that you brought this up. I think that in a lot of ways, most of us are putting on a fake identity. Like there's this accepted script, at the very least in the United States, the hi, how are you? I'm fine. How are you? And like you're supposed to follow the script, because if you don't, people look at you funny. And I don't know about you, but I'm never fine. Like, I'm not fine right now. I'm having my third panic attack of the day, which is usual. My mind is going through how many mistakes I've already made, about how my accent is coming through, how I'm tripping over my words, also running through every mistake I've made in my entire life. And that's my usual. And so I think it's really interesting that you brought this up, because I think in order to fit in with society, we're fed this myth that we have to pretend to be quote unquote okay. But I think that it keeps people so far apart from each other, to where people can feel lonely even when they're around other people, because that vulnerable, intimate connection is missing. And I think it's what allowed Natasha to survive, because she kept her trauma at bay, but she also didn't have a chance to develop close relationships and something meaningful. And it wasn't until she joined the Avengers that she allowed people to get to know her. And I think it's when we actually allow people to really see us, not just accept our own identity, but allow other people to see our true identity, that we can really form meaningful experiences with other people, making it not a weakness, but our greatest strength.
That is amazing to say. The way I was going to go about it actually was just outing myself. What I mean by that is, as everybody knows, I go by Doc Issues on this podcast, and yet that is not my name. Okay, I have a different name. There are several reasons why I don't use my name for this. One is my own insecurities. I'll admit that. The other has to do with just, I've received phone calls from previous patients, like from the hospital, things like that, just asking me to be their doctor. I'm not in the position to do that. I work for a hospital system. They have their own way of going about things. So I know that. I'm living that in terms of just having to have a certain level of a facade. But at the same time, it's the strange dynamic of sometimes you develop certain characteristics of one facade versus another, and they both are you. In other words, it's a weird way of going about life. And yet I'm not just talking about Doc Issues now. I can apply this to everyone. We know what we have to do and how we have to present at work. Of course, this past year has really flipped that a bit, but still, you know there are certain expectations versus when you're at home with family, versus when you're out with other friends that have a completely different lifestyle, versus, being involved in an organization maybe that, you've never met for the first time, in which case you feel like you have to be the most proper form of yourself. All of these different things, as Anthony said, it takes a lot of effort, a lot of energy, and heaven forbid, and I'll bring just briefly, it's culture in general, but from my standpoint, you could also bring in race, the idea of what we call code switching, the idea that in certain circumstances, you're supposed to act and say a certain way, things a certain way, and do things a certain way, and then when you can quote unquote let your hair down, you do something else. This is something that many of us do. It's just whether or not you're going to actually be cognizant of it. And if you're going to make an effort where, if you're doing it, can you make the transition smoother for yourself so that you're not creating more dissonance for yourself throughout the day? Or at least if it's something where, let's be honest, things that you may dread doing and having to put on for a while, visiting family that you didn't want to talk to for the first time in a long time, just as a random thing. Or dealing with a coworker that you don't want to deal with, at least making it so that for the moment you're not outwardly projecting it so that it's automatically negative for the people around you. You don't want to be the quote unquote Debbie Downer or the person that's always pissed off at the water cooler, whatever. I'm just making colloquial examples, but all of that has to do with this idea that when we say we are our authentic self, what does that mean each time you have to give just a little glimpse into what you're doing for others and how you're interacting with others? It's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be consistent. And yes, you're going to have some emotional responses that aren't the greatest. And yet, through all of that, you still have to recognize that it's all you. And even when it's not okay, it could still be okay.
It's funny that you're bringing this up, and Doc, to your point about code switching, certainly there's, a cultural aspect to that and certainly a racial component there as well. And Dr. Scarlet, talking about your, being open and honest about your anxiety and your panic attacks, I think you're doing swimmingly. And as someone who also suffers from anxiety and such, I know that you may appreciate my words and you may hear them, but there's that part of you that's not going to take them to heart. Because,
by the way, that's 3 for 3 here. I
was going to say that's also Doc. But we're sitting here talking about the facades, and you were all bringing this up. And I look over at my desk and I look at my collection of dice that I have for D&D, and I'm looking here at a D4 that has 4 sides, and each one of them is has a different number on it. And it can represent different facets of your personality, that you may need to be a little more outgoing one time. You may need to be a little funnier one time. You may need to be the, intellectual one time. So you've got the D4, you have the very common D6, there's a D8. All of them have multiple facets, but they're all still one die. That even regardless of what number comes up on top, regardless of what you're rolling, it's all still one die. I've got a D20 here. I don't think this even qualifies for Natasha. I think she's probably like a D100, and that's basically like a golf ball at that point. But it does go back to that notion of that very relatable notion of showing different facets of yourself, but still being you. And to your point, Dr. Scarlet, I do think we need to break down the whole, hi, how are you? I'm fine. Good. You? Okay. We call that small talk. It should be wall talk, because all it does is put the barrier up between us, at least from my perspective. If somebody tells me authentically that they're having a bad day, I'm not going to respond with, oh God, why are you burdening me with this? Or, oh, that's not what you're supposed to say. It's, can I help? It comes from a genuine place of empathy. And I think I would like to believe that the large majority of us are not so monstrous as to respond, oh God, but it is unusual to hear that kind of response. But I think, again, we need to normalize it. And that's something that we talk about on the show all the time. And I know that you're very big on, is normalizing those discussions so that when someone does raise those very valid points, and we can recognize the signs that someone is struggling before they reach that horrible breaking point, to be able to say, hey, you look like you're having a rough day. You good? Do you need somebody to talk to?
Yeah, it's fascinating that you mentioned that. I didn't plan on saying this, but just last week I was at work, and randomly, it was a rough time, and someone came to me and they just said, wow, you look like you're a bit antsy right now. Do you need a drink of water? It wasn't one of the nurses. It wasn't one of my colleagues. It wasn't one of the social workers. It was one of my own patients. And I actually said, you know what? Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's been rough, but I'm still here for you too. Don't worry. And they said, oh, we know. That's why I came to talk to you, because you always kept it real with me. So I'll keep it real with you. So that's the thing. We don't have to keep up with the perception of perfection. That's one of the big things that I've noticed has started to change a little bit. I think COVID led to some of that, mainly because when you have, as we're doing right now, when you have cameras coming into your home, there's only so much you can do. You can frame it, all of that. Meanwhile, I got rid of that a long time ago. You can see the freaking laundry rack behind me. But the point is, we all started to realize, okay, people are starting to get glimpses into who we are and how we live. And if we start developing the comfort around that on a regular basis, then maybe we can all have a much more enjoyable experience, even when we're in crisis situations.
So, Dr. Scarlet, I don't know if you have anything you want to add.
No, I thought that was beautifully said.
Well, we do our best. We try. So we're going to take a quick break. We'll plug a couple shows. When we get back, we'll get into treatment. Stay tuned. This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. Is there something interfering with your happiness or preventing you from achieving your goals? BetterHelp will assess your individual needs and match you with a licensed professional therapist. You can begin communicating within 48 hours.
It isn't a crisis line. It's not self-help. It's professional counseling done securely online. BetterHelp has a network of over 15,000 counselors with a broad range of expertise. You can log in and message your counselor anytime and get timely and thoughtful responses. You can also schedule regular video or phone sessions. No waiting room required.
BetterHelp is committed to facilitating great therapeutic matches, so they make it easy and free to change counselors if you feel you don't have a good connection. It's more affordable than traditional offline counseling, and financial help is available. BetterHelp wants you to start living a happier life today. Visit betterhelp.com/capes, that's better HELP, and join the over 1 million people taking charge of their mental health with the help of an experienced professional.
Special offer for Capes on the Couch fans. Get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/capes.
Hey, it's good old boy Mike.
This is good old boy Dave.
From Sips, Suds, and Smokes. Sips, Suds, and Smokes covers wine, tea, coffee, distilled spirits, whiskey, scotch, beer, cigars.
People whose first name starts with Q.
Bad fake British accents.
And we always take time to make fun of the people of Alabama.
Banned once again.
It's a 1-hour episode that's mildly entertaining for about 22 minutes.
I think mildly would be a vast improvement.
Well, we do have the only beer show with the Holy Man. We talk about these products and rate them with our unique rating system, like our Suds 5 rating. Do you really have something better to do with your life for an hour than actually listen to this show?
Well, don't make them think about it.
Well, join us on this radio station, podcast network, or via our Android app.
Hey, this is Cullen Bunn, and you're listening to Capes on the Couch.
And we're back with Dr. Janina Scarlet again. Thank you so much, Dr. Scarlet. So treatment in universe for Natasha. And we're going to allude to this a little bit in the skit, but she's definitely a tough nut to crack. And it's a question of how much help is she going to accept, because she's accepted who she is and what she does. And so the notion of trying to confront that trauma may be antithetical to her ultimate end goals. But, I leave that to the professionals to discuss.
So my idea for this one, and as always, anybody that's listened to more than one of our episodes knows that I do this for the sake of in-universe, for storytelling and just having fun. But it could be incredibly dangerous if it backfired. I want to be a target. I want to get on that hit list. I want to basically be someone that she would have to study, have to review, know my patterns. And clearly with my background, I'll be honest, I don't have like the types of skeletons that would leave me on a hit list. So I think that's a part of it. And as Dr. Scarlet had already said, she always seems to give the impression that she's going to take into consideration what a person is really doing, if they're quote unquote good or not. And from that standpoint, I think she actually would try and put in one of those situations and get to know me a little bit before doing whatever it is that she's supposed to do. And I think that would give an opportunity, because at this point, I would have no secrets. She's good enough at her job that she would know everything about me. And therefore, I would say, okay, you always wonder about whether or not it's a level playing field. Right now, it's as uneven as it can get. You have the advantage over me with your physical skills. You have the advantage over me with knowing everything about me. I know nothing about you. Do with that what you will. And I have the confidence, based on the little that I do know, that she would make some pretty interesting and I think positive decisions based off of it. And I think that's where some of her healing could begin.
All right, Dr. Scarlet, anything you would do differently or anything you want to add?
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think it'd be really fascinating to see her in treatment. And I think that she, given who she is, probably would always try to have the upper hand because of how uncomfortable she is with letting people close. But what's really interesting is once she lets someone close, they're a part of her forever. The Avengers have become her family. And whether we're talking about Hulk or Hawkeye, they've become a very significant part of her life, and there's nothing she wouldn't do for them.
Very well said. So out of universe, then, I would draw the analog of, we were talking earlier about soldiers and or police officers, people who have to make those kinds of decisions, someone with a traumatic childhood, clearly, and, someone, again, who has done less than savory things, shall we say, in their past and feels the constant need to make amends for a real individual with these issues, what are some of the things that you would suggest for treatment options? And we'll start with Dr. Scarlet.
Right. I think if I was working with an individual like that, maybe a service member or a veteran who had done things that they're very ashamed about, or things that have gone against their core values, one of the things that we would work on is actually processing it, where the individual gets to go over their experience to desensitize them to that experience. And if they're unable to make amends, there are a number of different exercises where the individual can talk to either the person that they've wronged, as what's called an empty chair exercise, where the individual pretends like the other person's in the room, or they can receive guidance from, let's say, a loved one, maybe a friend, even if that friend is no longer alive or not able to be present. And then it would be important for that individual to take steps that honor their own core values. For example, to help other veterans who are going through difficulties. So for a lot of veterans who are struggling with PTSD, doing peer therapy, peer support for other veterans with PTSD tends to be very, very helpful in helping them develop something called post-traumatic growth. And that refers to meaning making based on what happened to us, and finding a way to give back, which for a lot of individuals tends to reduce their trauma symptoms and allows them to take actions that are more in line with their core values.
Fantastic, Doc.
Yeah. So this is one of those rare times, because when I know that I'm, talking to another psychologist, I always defer, and that's totally fine. I also am familiar with, other modalities. I mean, I've referred people for EMDR, if depending on the type of PTSD they've had. As a psychiatrist, I do have access in terms of, different types of medication management, usually in those situations, if it's necessary, which once again, because I don't want to sound like a broken record, I am not a pill pusher. I do not automatically use that as first line. But if it's severe enough, then we do look at what's called selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, which can affect how a person is processing depression and anxiety that's going on. These are tools in the toolbox. They are not cures. The way I like to describe it is that everyone's a stick of dynamite. We don't know what is automatically going to make a person explode, but if we lengthen the fuse and if we put water on it, then you're going to have a greater chance of having a positive outcome. And that's the role that often I see people in those circumstances. Also, the idea of the involvement of the people around them, I know the peer support is immense. I've seen such great results with it. Involvement of loved ones. It's a core value of this show, but the destigmatization within that core group of people, referring to servicemen and women, first line responders, all of these people who, for the longest time, since we were talking about the idea of having so many different facets of our lives, no pun intended, they have to be the shield for everything in society. And the idea that I remember the banners when I was working with the VA, we hung them. We said, calling is a sign of strength, meaning, we would have the helpline and just letting people know, like, that's actually what we want to encourage, not the opposite. For the longest time, and I've had veterans in my own family, for the longest time, it was the opposite. You just don't say anything, you shut it down, all of that. And it's now at the point, and I could say with confidence that getting the word out that really just going ahead and finding whatever it is, being open about the idea that whatever it is that's helping you in a healthy way, then just seek it. Don't worry about how others are doing things, or you don't have to have the exact same format as everybody else. You don't have to be on the same medication. I've had these discussions where patients would say, like, why is he on this and she on that? And like, it doesn't matter. Is it helping you? And from that standpoint, I think that's really the focus. As long as people recognize whatever modalities are being used, that if they're working for you, don't give up on them. Don't think that it's weak. Don't think that it's silly. I hear so many different variations of those lines. And thank goodness, I'm noticing now more and more that people are open to this. And as long as that continues, then I think we're going to see some really good results with society as a whole.
Well, I know we've spoken on this show previously about the notion of peer support groups and for soldiers or police officers being able to talk to somebody who has been in those types of experiences, who has gone through similar things. Doesn't necessarily have to be the exact same thing, but just the notion that because of the close camaraderie and the kinship that the people in those groups feel with one another, that the idea that a fellow soldier or a fellow police officer or a fellow first responder will be able to say, this is how I was able to help put my burden down. These are some of the things that you can do. And I know, Doc, you've spoken about the different organizations on prior episodes about that, that something like that is such a benefit to everyone in the community. And that if resources are spent and put towards promoting those venues for people in those communities to take and to utilize, I think we'll start to see an exponential growth in the number of soldiers and service members and first responders and emergency folks using them. And eventually it will build, and that will help break down the collective stigma around the idea that calling is weak or whatever. And as you said, Doc, you're already starting to see that. And I think if we continue to promote that and we put resources towards it, that we can see a further exacerbated breaking down of those stigmas. And so hopefully one day it won't even be a question. It will just be, oh, you're struggling? I'm going to call somebody. It's not even going to be a thing. Whether that happens in our lifetime, who knows? I'm a fairly optimistic individual. So maybe. So now we're going to have a little fun. And with the help of Dr. Scarlet, we are going to see what happens when we get Natasha on Dr. Issues' couch.
Hello, Natasha. I'm Dr. Issues.
Good afternoon, Doctor.
I'm afraid we're going to have to go through a bit of an introductory period. Normally, I get a file on my patients before I meet with them, but yours was almost entirely redacted.
Well, that's just how it is in my line of work.
Well, that's fair, but I've worked with your colleagues before. I've never seen anything quite like this. It's like the whole thing was covered in black Sharpie.
Some of my employers would kill both of us if they even knew I was speaking with you. And frankly, this conversation is more dangerous than most.
In that case, I appreciate you speaking with me. And be sure to know I take all the necessary precautions for my own safety as well as the confidentiality of my clients.
No offense, Doc, but that won't stop some of the more unsavory characters that I've dealt with. They've come at me at Avengers Mansion. I don't think this office will hold them.
Sad to say, but I've dealt with worse. So we'll deal with that if and when the time comes. Let's get back to you. What can we accomplish today?
Probably less than what I would want out of this.
How so?
This is going to be the type of scenario where I don't say names. I only give hints. And if you're sharp enough to follow my lead, then maybe I can learn something from you.
This is way more nebulous than I imagined. Usually when people do that, I think they're demonstrating paranoia.
But is it really paranoia when you know that people are truly after you?
Right, but the fight, flight, or freeze phenomenon doesn't turn itself on and off like a switch if you exhausted yourself in that hypervigilant state for too long. Plus, it makes it difficult for anyone to get to know you.
Thank you for stating the obvious. Really, thank you. People don't understand that it's inherent in what I do. I didn't sign up for this life. I was bred for it.
Well, maybe that's true, but...
There are no maybes about it. I can't say much about such things, but think about how organized different agencies can be, especially under authoritarian rule.
Ooh, got it. Okay, sorry to cast any doubt about your experience. I'm thanking you for keeping the conversation on track. Is it fair to ask then how being so harshly molded at a young age influences you now? Like, do you have any nightmares or flashbacks to those events?
I've learned to regulate my physiology just fine.
Well, how about the emotional content then?
I have all of the expected emotions.
Interesting choice of words. I'm not familiar with what would be considered expected? I mean, because that's such a wide range, like anger, sadness, fear.
All of it.
Then you have lots of possibilities to work with.
More than, though. Relief, joy, pain. I know that you're really a doctor because you went for what's considered negative, but I'm a lot stronger than you realize. I don't want a pity case here. In a way, you're only alive right now because I made a decision when I stepped into this office.
Is that a veiled threat at me in some way to show some superiority? I don't have a god complex or anything.
No, I meant it much simpler than that.
You're so resolute about this, All right, once again, I'll have to take you at face value. And yet, that brings us back to the original point. How can I help you if the only thing on your mind is helping others besides yourself?
I don't get such luxury. You seem to have this mindset that I'm intentionally draining my life away, toiling at the behest of others and neglecting my needs. That's nonsense. I'm alive because I see all of the angles. Too many times it's kill or be killed. But what about when you save someone? Save hundreds. How many times can I give an eye for an eye before we're all blind?
That is noble beyond compare. I do hear the pain that comes through too. Same with exhaustion. I'm not asking you to change everything. I'm asking if you want some part, any part, to be better.
So you want me to be a better killing machine?
Anything but that.
So you see my problem. Even when I'm supposedly doing good in the world, it's typically because someone is doing worse had been brought down.
Least common denominator. Okay, so how do we change the math? You know I won't help you with that one part of the equation you mentioned, so...
You're not making the ultimate sinner into a saint, and I'm not even religious.
Well, for one thing, I'd hardly consider you the ultimate sinner. I mean, for another, you're not... We're not getting into that side.
That makes one of us.
You really would go that far, huh?
When you've seen what I've seen and done what I've done, there's not even a question about it.
Then no shame, no blame. There's only the way up, the next assignment. Clue me in on your emotions. I'll try to establish the right path to maximizing your efficacy and relating to people in a mutually beneficial way.
Now you're trying to make it sound like I'm a wallflower who's never dated. Come on.
That's not what I'm getting at. I mean...
Boy, get down.
Yes, ma'am?
Who knew I was coming?
No one outside of my assistant.
That's one person too many. Did you see where that shot came from?
No, I'm kind of busy doing my job. I thought you saw the angles.
This is why I don't want to come here in the first place. Okay, stick your head up and see if you spot any movement.
Hell no! I'm not going to get sniped so you can save the day again.
Fine. Do you have something you can use as a distraction?
I have a paperweight on my desk.
Gotta work with what we've got. Okay, on the count of 3, toss it to me. 1, 2, 3.
Ugh.
До свидания, asshole.
I can't believe this.
Really? You do what you do and you're surprised?
No, I can't believe something like this happened and I don't have a pun prepared.
You're a strange man.
Thanks.
And yet, not the worst at your job. Perhaps I'll come back for another session. But if I do that, we're talking directly or not at all. Also, check your assistant's background.
Consider it done. So do you want to keep that paperweight? Consider it a memento?
No, thanks. I have enough stuff weighing me down. I don't need something else.
Oh man, another pun. Okay, you're good at this.
See you around, Doc.
So thanks to the Black Widow, Doc manages to live another day. And thank you so much, Dr. Scarlet, for coming on the show, for talking Natasha, for playing Natasha. Before we get into the ending stuff, why don't you tell us, where folks can find you on the internet, and tell us a little bit again about your recent book.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor. My website is superhero-therapy.com. I'm on Twitter at Shadow Quill like a feather. And I'm on Instagram. And honestly, if you just look for Janina Scarlet, you'll be able to find me fairly easily. The most recent book that came out in the United States is Super Women. It's mainly for women, but a lot of men have actually reported that they've really enjoyed it and benefited from it a lot as well. And it is written as a support group for women where there are 7 women who are each dealing with a different type of trauma. And the reader is the 8th member of the group. And so it's an interactive book where the different characters talk to the reader, and then there's a way for the reader to respond back. And my goal with this book is to allow individuals to know that they're not alone going through their experiences.
That's, as I said, I have it on my nightstand. It's a fantastic read, very helpful. I've been very open and honest on this show about, my struggles with my own mental health and, talking to a therapist and everything. And so when this book came out, as I said, I've been following you on Twitter for a while. When I read that this book was coming out, I said, well, A, I was buying it because I thought it'd be helpful for me. And B, I wanted to, support you in your endeavors. So, we'll throw a link up to it in the recommended reading. If you want to read about Natasha, I would recommend you read Black Widow Volume 5. That's the Edmondson Noto run. I think it's like 20 issues. There's maybe 3 or 4 trade paperbacks on it. And like I said, just fantastic. The story, the artwork, everything about it is just, mwah. I mean, there's a lot of other good runs on the character, but I feel that one is really just the quintessential Black Widow. And so upcoming episodes, Rogue from the X-Men, Doctor Doom, and Jocasta. So I think we're really hitting several various characters with a whole host of issues. As always, you can find all of our episodes on our website, capesonthecouch.com. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Capes on the Couch. And you can email us at capesonthecouch@gmail.com if you have any questions. And again, we'll also have links to Dr. Scarlet and all of her various socials and her website and the book in the show notes. So Doc, Issues, anything you want to add before we leave?
Just remember, the Black Widow is known for certain actions that it does that leaves it alone. But before that point, it did have love.
It did have love. And always remember that you can always tell a Black Widow by the scarlet marker on its body. So thank you again, Dr. Janina Scarlet. Pleasure as always. And hopefully we'll have you back on the show again in the future. For Dr. Issues, I'm Anthony Sitko. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Capes on the Couch podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Dr. Issues is a psychiatrist, but he is not your psychiatrist and does not have knowledge of your individual situation. For any personal mental health concerns, please consult your own healthcare providers. For medical emergencies, please call 911 or the designated number in your area immediately. Remember that you are not alone and help is out there.